continue along our Jewish journey through the Gospel of John. Now, as is our habit, as is our way of doing things along this journey, we like to review where we have been so that we can all be on the same page. And previously, on the Jewish journey through the Gospel of John, when we deal with the Gospel of John, and when we deal with, of course, the structure, you know already the structure is arranged according to the Jewish holidays, and in chapter 11, we've reached a hinge. We have seen thus far, up to this point, we have seen Yeshua say I am. We have seen him say, I am, 5 times. Who remembers the 5 times Yeshua has used I am with a predicate? Okay, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. And in this passage, I am the resurrection and the life. Very important. These are big claims. Each one of these claims is at minimum a claim to messiahship, and more realistically, these are claims to something akin to deity, to equality with the Father, to have the authority, to have the responsibility, to be entrusted with that responsibility. These are actions that are only undertaken by God himself. So, just reviewing some of the last few words in the previous passage, Yeshua said to Martha, who had come to him, your brother will rise again. And Martha says, of course, I know he'll rise again. My theology is straight up. I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day, like every other Jew will rise in resurrection. Of course, we remember from 1 Samuel the concept of resurrection. The Lord kills, he makes alive, he brings down to Sheol, and he rises up. Ezekiel, very, very important, Ezekiel 37, you shall know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from your graves, O my people. Again, resurrection, something built in to the structure of Jewish theology by this point. And Daniel 12:2, many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, with others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. So her theology is very straight. She understands that there will be a resurrection at the last day, and she explains that to Jesus. I know, I expect it. But Yeshua says, no, let me make clear, I'm not talking about theology, I'm not talking about future times, I'm not talking about your eschatological position. Yeshua said to her, I am the resurrection. I am the life. He who believes in me will live, even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. So in other words, if you believe in me, you will absolutely be resurrected. It's guaranteed. And furthermore, in fact, I'm the personification of the resurrection. That's how deep my authority runs. And further than resurrection, eternal life. If you live and believe in me, you will never die. Your body may die, yes. But from the point on of your belief in me, you have eternal life. Do you believe this? And Yeshua, in asking Martha in the text, John, in writing the story, as he records it the way he does, is implicitly asking the reader, do you believe this? And she said to him, yes, Lord. I have believed. I already have believed. This is a belief that I hold. And the belief is, in other words, I'm not coming to it right now. It's not a eureka moment for me. This is my beliefs. Yes, Lord. I believed. You are the Christ. You are the Mashiach. You are the Messiah, the Son of God. By these two terms interchangeably used. Christ, the Son of God. Even he, again, another term that is used interchangeably with Messiah and Son of God. Even he who comes into the world from where? From heavenly abode. It's the theology of John in a nutshell. By the way, I still do not have these slides on my podium here. If anybody can give me an assistance, tech team. Well, let's move on. New material. When she had said this, Martha, she went away and called Mary, her sister, saying secretly, because she wanted Mary to be able to have private time with Yeshua as well, and she was surrounded by a living room full of mourners. The teacher is here and calling for you. The rabbi, the teacher, is calling for you. And when she heard it, she got up quickly and was coming to him. Now, we haven't seen Yeshua. John doesn't record Yeshua calling for Mary specifically. Just a reminder of how little we actually have of the events that go on. We are picking up pieces. We're getting an outline. John is giving us an outline, not a detailed account of everything that Yeshua has done. It's just the salient points, and we can pick it up as we read along. When she had heard it, she, Mary, got up quickly and was coming to him. Now Yeshua had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha met him. He's still outside the village, waiting for an invitation to come to the funeral, or perhaps to, for the time being, avoid the crowds, although it's not going to be an issue for Yeshua because he's going to perform an extraordinary miracle in front of a large crowd momentarily. Then the Jews who were with her in the house and consoling her, when they saw that Mary got up quickly and went out, well, they followed her. So much for a little quiet moment with Yeshua, so much for a little private time. They follow Mary because they think, suppose that she was going to the tomb to weep there. And it is the responsibility of the mourners to mourn in tandem with the family. So you mourn with those who mourn. And the idea is you never leave a mourner. Even today, when the Jewish people have a death and the family, and they sit Shiva, they are not to be alone, if possible. They're not to be alone. And so people come for 7 days. People come like a revolving door. The door is not locked of the home in which the mourner is living, where the mourners are living. And people just come in, bring food, sit, whatever the case may be, and then leave whenever they want to, so that there's always, regularly, there's always mourners there with it. But in the ancient Israel, there were always lots of mourners, and in fact, if there weren't enough people who mourned along with you, you hired professional mourners, so that there was always a crowd with you. And of course, Mary, Martha, Lazarus, they were a family apparently of some means, so there's no question of some influence in the community. So there's no question that there's a large crowd who are packing her house out, and they follow her, supposing she's going to the tomb to weep there. Therefore, when Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him, fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord. And again, remember, when we see the term Lord at this point, it's a polite term of address. It's a respectful term of address. Something a little bit better than sir, but certainly not Lord as in God. Sir, Adon, Hebrew, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Almost word for word verbatim what Martha said just a few verses back. Because they both believed that if Jesus had only been there, if Yeshua had only been present, they knew that he had the ability to heal the sick. He'd done it on multiple occasions. And Lazarus was sick. Yeshua would have been there. He could have healed Lazarus. He wouldn't have died. Very simple logic. If you'd been here, I know my brother would have been healed. He wouldn't have died. When Yeshua, therefore, saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and was troubled. That's a little bit of a weak translation. Deeply moved in spirit doesn't say enough. This term is generally used regarding outrage, anger of some sort. And maybe anger is too strong. Perhaps somewhere in the middle we find agitation. He was agitated and he was troubled. Why is he agitated? Why is he troubled? Well, it doesn't explicitly tell us in the text, which is why most translations try to smooth it out and say, well, he was just emotionally overwrought because he lost his friend. But there's more in the text going on there. Deeply moved in spirit. He's agitated, troubled. And it has something to do with when he sees her weeping and the crowd around her weeping. Now, some commentators will say that, well, he's upset because of the limitations of the faith of those who are present, that they're not expecting him to resurrect Lazarus. Of course, I look at that and look at the passage and say, well, that's kind of the point of this miracle. That's why he arrived on the fourth day, remember, because there's no chance that there's going to be any kind of resuscitation. The spirit has left the body because on the fourth day, absolutely the body has begun the process in earnest of decomposition. And the spirit is not going back in the body. And so they're not expecting resurrection, resuscitation. And so he can't be mad about that. Maybe he's angry, some posit, at death itself and the sin-cursed world in which death and sickness prevail. And well, perhaps, although he's come to conquer death. That's the point of why he's there. And so this is one of those, and I really don't like being ambiguous with the text. I don't like leaving ambiguity lying there, but in this instance, I hesitate to speculate where the text is not explicit. So draw your own conclusions here. There's plenty in the text that we can be firm about. And he said to them, "Where have you laid him? Where is his tomb?" in other words. And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." Remember, come and see. Great invitation of Yeshua in inviting his disciples to follow him and be his disciples. Well, here they say, "Lord, come and see." Come, we invite you to mourn with us at the tomb. Let us show you where we have laid him. Of course, if they'd only waited a little while longer, there's a nice sign now that says Lazarus' tomb. Apparently that wasn't there at the time, but that wasn't there for convenience. It's for visitors today. And Jesus wept. And the Jews were saying, "See how he loved him." They say, why is Jesus weeping? The weeping, the term for weeping here is not the wailing and the mourning that we see the professional mourners and the household of supporters doing, which is a very loud wailing, a very demonstrative, dramatic wailing. This weeping is a shedding of tears, and not great gasps of boo-hoo or woe is me, but just quiet tears. And why is Jesus crying? Well, the Jewish people have a guess, because he loved Lazarus so much. Is he crying because Lazarus has died? Well, he's about to provide the solution for this. And, or is it that Yeshua as he says in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." That he himself identifies with the mourners. He himself, even though he knows exactly what he has in his back pocket, what he's about to unleash, the power of resurrection itself, he identifies with his friends, with his loved ones, with the community of Jewish people. And as they mourn, he mourns as well. Even now, Yeshua, he mourns when we mourn. One of our congregants lost a 19-year-old niece this week. The family mourns, the friends mourn. Based upon this passage, I think that it is quite likely that God mourns as well. He mourns with us, not as one who is helpless and hopeless, but one who loves his people so much that when we have pain, he has pain. When we celebrate, he celebrates. When we triumph, there's a party in heaven. But nonetheless, Yeshua wept. It's not just the answer to a trivial pursuit question, what's the shortest verse in the Bible? There's powerful theology behind these two little English words, Jesus wept. So the crowd was saying, see how he loved him. He loved him enough to cry for him. But some of them said, why is he crying? Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind man, 2 chapters previously, chapter 9, congenital blindness, never been done before in the history of Israel, has been done. So they remember, this is a widely circulated miracle, and it would have had to been because it's a miracle that goes to court, as chapter 9 reveals. Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? But again, the presupposition being, if he'd only been here. If he had only been here. But remember, Yeshua stays where he is until arriving the fourth day, without any hope from the crowd that this man who had healed the eyes of the blind could have raised this man from sickness or from death. But Yeshua, again, being deeply moved within. It's this term, agitation again. Outrage, anger. Let's settle on agitation. Being agitated within, came to the tomb. It's always interesting to see the emotions that are revealed regarding Yeshua, because he's not a flannel graph, two-dimensional character. He is real. He's a real man, living a real life, feeling what humanity feels, for whatever reasons, spelled out explicitly in the text or not. But he comes to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and a stone was lying against it, sealing the cave up. Let me show you what I mean. This is, it's about 100 years ago, a little bit maybe more than 100 years ago, is what Lazarus' tomb looks like. It looked like back then. It's changed because they built a mosque there. This is what it looks like today. They've built a mosque there, and so that's not the same entrance as Yeshua stood in front of, but nonetheless, it is an entrance to traditionally what is referred to as Lazarus' tomb. It might well be. And you see here's an entrance, no stone. But this, by the way, those of you who went with us to Israel a year and a half ago, and if you've been to Israel, you would see this on a bus ride as you're traveling down the road of Israel, somewhere shy of Megiddo. You actually see this on the highway. This is very visible. Right in front of it is a guardrail separating the traffic, the road, the highway from I've snapped a million of these shots of this tomb because it really does reveal what these kinds of tombs, the tomb, for example, of Lazarus, not only Lazarus, but Jesus, Yeshua. This small entrance, this cave, and a stone to roll in front of the entrance. So this is an example. That's not Lazarus' tomb. You saw it already. This is just an example of the type of tomb. And if you look in, if you were to peer in to this tomb, you will see it's a cave. It's a carved out cave. It's to create an open area, a niche. And in the case of Lazarus' tomb, it actually descends down a set of stairs, as you see right there. And there's an anteroom, an outside or an interior room that precedes going into the actual room where the body would have been left. So it's called an anteroom, and then beyond that would be the actual tomb itself. So imagine as you're going down this tomb, you're going down these stairs of the tomb, you have the outside room, and then you have the interior room where the body would be laid. This is an Egyptian mummy. I've cut off the head from the video because it's a little bit disturbing. But you get the idea of the kind of wrapping, the kind of grave clothes that were used at that time. This is not exactly right, but it's the closest image that I could find to reveal to what burial rituals were like at the time. These are the kind of grave clothes that he would have, wrapped very carefully. There would be spices, not to embalm the body, but basically to cover up any smell. That's what the spices were for at the time, held together by this wrapping. And then a face cloth, separate cloth, would go across the face, around the head. And Yeshua said, remove the stone. Martha says, whoa, hold on. The sister of the deceased. Now we know Martha's the sister of the deceased. Why does John give us this information again? Because as the older sister, it is her job to protect the sanctity of her brother's tomb. I said, look, the sister of the deceased said to him, Lord, not a good idea. Why? By this time, there will be a stench, for he's been dead 4 days. Let's not remember my brother by the smell emanating from the depths of the tomb. Let's just leave it where it is and leave it sealed up. Please, I can't handle, I just can't handle that. I don't think it would be appropriate, Lord. But Yeshua said to her, did I not say to you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? Which, of course, he did say that, and we've seen that earlier in the passage. So Jesus overrides the sister, and they removed the stone. And Jesus raised his eyes. And he prays publicly. And he prays in a loud voice for the purpose of being heard. It's not that Yeshua, when he prays to his Father, has a bad connection and so has got to communicate in a loud voice with his Father, or even when he raises Lazarus. He raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. When did Yeshua pray that the Father has heard him? previously. John's just giving us the details that we need, not everything that happened. Father, I thank you that you've heard me. I knew that you always hear me. But, and here's where he tells you why he's praying the way he's praying. But because of the people standing around, I said it, so that they may believe that you sent me. Again, one of the key concepts in the Gospel of John is the sent one, the one coming into the world. Go bathe in the pool of Siloam, which means sent, the one sent from the presence of the Father into the world, so that they may believe that you sent me from you to them. And I'm praying now for their benefit to make a theological point. Sometimes it's okay. Yeshua did it. It's okay sometimes to pray aloud and share your theology. You see, sometimes pastors do this, and oftentimes it's at the end of a sermon where, because of time, they may have skipped some point that they wanted to make. Well, at that point of the prayer, then they can get that theological point out that they couldn't fit in the sermon time, but they get it out in the prayer time. You see this all the time. Or, of course, we do this at funerals, and it's altogether appropriate. Again, for the benefit of those who are listening. Because when you pray aloud, it's not only God who hears your prayers. It's anyone within an earshot. So you might as well make the most of articulating what you want to communicate, both to God and on a horizontal level, so that they may believe that you sent me. Now, he can't go in to the tomb. Yeshua is not going to go into the tomb. He's going to stay outside of the tomb. Why? Because of Torah. Numbers 19, 13 and 14. Anyone who touches a corpse, the body of a man who has died, in case you don't understand what a corpse is, shall be unclean for 7 days. Now, there are ways of purifying, but nonetheless, Yeshua is not going to get unclean. There's no need. So he stays out, and he'll do his communicating from outside the tomb, so that there's no chance that he will touch later. Doesn't need to lay hands on the corpse, doesn't need to approach the corpse, doesn't need to stand over the corpse and hover over the corpse and any other bodies that are buried in the family tomb there. He's not going to come in contact with anybody at any stage of decomposition. See, because Jewish people, the burial practices of Second Temple Judaism, first century, Second Temple Judaism, were to lay the body out on a slab, to wait a year for the body to decompose, then when there's just bones left, for the bones to be collected and put into an ossuary, put up on a shelf in the family tomb. It was a way of being economical and making the most of the space that you had. So he's not going to go and descend into the tomb. But when he had said these things, roll away the stone, when he had prayed his prayer, Father, thanks for hearing me, he cried out with a loud voice. Because, again, not because he's trying to be dramatic. It's just that Lazarus has got to hear him through down the stairs and across into the second room and the back room. Want to make sure that Lazarus hears it. No. He says in a loud voice, I think he's demonstrating his authority. I'll tell you why in a second. We'll see exactly what he said. He cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, Elazar, his Hebrew name, come forth. Doesn't repeat it 5 different times, half a dozen times. One time, loud voice, authoritative tone, Elazar, come forth. This goes back to John 5, when Yeshua was speaking about the authority that he had regarding the resurrection of the dead. He says, truly, truly, amen, amen. I say to you, an hour is coming and now is, When the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God. This is where it now is, from chapter 5 to chapter 11. Okay, so it now is kind of 6 chapters later, but nonetheless, there is a coming a time, and now is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming in which all who are in the tombs and hear his voice will come forth. The voice of whom? God? The voice of the Son of Man. The voice of Yeshua, acting with the authority of God as if he is God, because he is God. Is every bit of authority, every bit of power as the Father has. And when the resurrection comes, it will be the voice of Yeshua that we hear, calling us forth to rise. And the man who had died came forth, bound hand and foot with wrappings. Yeah, how to get from one room to the other, up the stairs. That's a miracle in itself. No. Listen, God raised the dead. I'm not going to ask a technicality. Well, how tightly was he wrapped? Could he do the resurrection shuffle? Nonetheless, come on. You don't ask a question like that, a technicality question, a technical question, when Yeshua is doing a miracle of this extravagance. It simply tells us that the man who died, Lazarus, came forth, exactly as Yeshua had commanded, come forth. And he's bound hand and foot with wrappings. He's still got the wrappings on. Maybe they were loosened a little bit. He's got some wiggle room there. And his face was wrapped around with a cloth. So how did he see through the cloth with resurrected eyes? Does he have X-ray vision? No, the cloth would have been see-through anyway. I mean, we all know, that when we try to blindfold our kids for birthday parties and games, and I don't even want to know why you'd blindfold your kid for other reasons, but we all know you got to double up the cloth, and you got to make sure there's no room for peeking, and they can't see through because a single wrap and that's the way it was with the grave cloth. Single, it's just linen. And so he would have been able to see gauzily, if you will, but he would have seen. His face was wrapped around with a cloth. Again, same as we're going to see with Yeshua at his resurrection. It's one of the reasons that I absolutely reject the Shroud of Turin. It's an interesting concept, an interesting idea, but it does not reflect first century Jewish Second Temple Judaism's burial practices at the time of the New Testament. And it certainly doesn't reflect what John says, that there is what they call a napkin. It's just a linen cloth, so that's a face cloth. And Shroud of Turin doesn't have that. It's all one big piece. His face was wrapped around with a cloth. Yeshua said to them, unbind him and let him go. Take those cockamamie wrappings off of him. Shake off all those spices. He doesn't need it. He doesn't smell. As fresh as a daisy. Resurrected. Friend. Where's the part of the story where Lazarus says, hey, thanks, or I can't believe it, or, I saw this white light and I went toward the light. There's no follow-up to this. I want to know all the other stuff, right? I mean, if this had happened today, right, Lazarus would be writing best-selling books. They'd make movies out of it, right? They'd exploit it. John doesn't exploit the story. It's like, sometimes I feel like Jack Webb is writing the gospel, just the facts, ma'am, only the facts, here it is. Don't give me too many details, just the facts. Don't embellish it. And that's how John writes. Therefore, many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what he had done believed in him. If you want to talk about a miracle that will get people's attention, it's pretty hard to top resurrecting a dead body on the fourth day after decomposition had indisputably, in the heat of Jerusalem and Judea, had already set in, just shy of Passover. So we're talking about, March, okay? So it's starting to get a little bit warm. So many saw what Yeshua had done. And they believed in him. And there's no comment on the quality of their belief. And oftentimes, Yeshua's like, yeah, you believe because you saw something I did. How about you believe what I say? But in this instance, they not only believed what he said, but also what he had done. And we move on. And here's where John is concerned about. This is what John's concern is. Not how many of them believed or the quality of their belief, but even some of them who had been in the crowd, who saw this miracle, some of them are rats. Not rats. I want to share what Yeshua had done because this is pretty big stuff. And they go to the Pharisees, and they told them the things which Jesus had done. And looking at it from an optimistic point of view, they're witnessing to the Pharisees. Look, you have a problem with this guy. Well, we understand up to this point the problem you've had, but let me tell you what we've just seen. It's going to be very hard to make the argument that he is not, let's just say, something special. Maybe you want to stop short of saying Messiah, although I don't know why he would, but let's just say that he's a special case. And they told him the things Jesus had done. Raising of the dead. Who had done that? But therefore, because of what they heard Yeshua had done, don't miss this, that's the therefore. Therefore, the chief priests, so the Pharisees heard this, and they told two friends and so on. They went to the Sadducees, to the chief priests. Again, these guys don't get along. Sadducees, Pharisees, they don't get along. They're on opposite ends of the theological spectrum. But the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and politics makes strange bedfellows. And chief priests, the Pharisees, they convened a council. The Sanhedrin met. Whether it's a formal meeting of the Sanhedrin or an informal meeting of just an inner circle of cultural and religious and theological elite, hard to say. But nonetheless, the Sanhedrin meet, or at least a portion of them. And they were saying, what are we doing? Which is a great question for the readers to ask of the Jewish leadership. What are you doing? At every point in the story, when you have the opportunity to take an opposite point of view from the hero, from Yeshua, from the Messiah, from God's agent of redemption, you choose the wrong side of the argument. What are you doing? But they ask themselves this, what are we doing? For this man is performing many signs. We can't pretend he's not performing the miraculous. We cannot pretend he hasn't done what he's done. There's too many witnesses, and he's far too popular with the people. If we let him go on like this, current trajectory, all men will believe in him. He's trending, and his popularity is rising with a bullet. If we let him go on, if we don't intervene, all men will believe in him. And then that's a problem for us. Because then the Romans will come. Remember, Israel is occupied. Judea is occupied. The Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. Our place is temple. They will take away the temple from us, and they will take away the nation from us. We've been on the bottom end of the rung of the nations before. Our temple has been destroyed before. Our nation has been dispersed before. This guy's trouble for us. And we, as the theological elite and religious and political elite of our nation, it is our duty to protect the people from their own stupidity and from their own credulousness in following this guy to their own destruction. We know what's best for our people. And we will take actions to protect our people from their own predisposition to follow this Messianic fellow. Now, don't miss that these cultural, theological, religious, political elite figures, if the Romans do indeed take them away from the temple and disperse the nation, well, needless to say, there goes their power base. The power base no longer exists, which, of course, is what happens in 70 AD when finally the Jewish people revolt and the Romans do indeed take away the temple, they destroy the temple and remove so many Jewish people, followed by a second Roman revolt 65 years later, and they're removed from Jerusalem. They're removed not only from the temple, but from Jerusalem, and the land of Judea is renamed Palestina, and Jerusalem is devoid of Jews and renamed Aelia Capitolina. So they know the Romans. They do. They know the Romans. And they're going to protect the Jewish people from making the foolish mistakes that apparently they're going to want to make. So all men will believe in them. The Romans will come and take away our place in our nation. But one of them, Caiaphas, you know this guy, Josephus Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Josephus Caiaphas was high priest from 18 AD to 36 AD, so 18 years. It's a really long tenure for high priests under the Romans, and the Greeks first, and then the Romans. It's a long tenure for a high priest. In fact, the previous three priests who had served prior to Caiaphas, they only last about a year apiece. So boom, boom, boom. So that's why John says high priest that year, because it's been a revolving door. According to Torah, it's a inheritable position, and it's lifelong. Once you are appointed, then it goes to your next generation, and so on and so on. But it's a political position under the Romans. So that's why he specifies Josephus Caiaphas, who was high priest that year and remains high priest for the next few years until both he and Pilate, in the same year, both get the boot from Rome, said to them, "You know nothing at all," which the readers of John should be saying as well. You know nothing at all. But for the high priest, who's the head of the council, to say that is, well, it's what I would call chutzpahdik. It's very nervy, it's very brash, but that's exactly the way Josephus describes the way that Pharisees and Sadducees talk. Pharisees are friendly to one another and very nice, but the Sadducees, the behavior of the Sadducees one toward another is to a degree of their conversation barbarous, as if they were strangers to. It's very abrupt, it's very in your face, barbarous. If Josephus had known of the type at the time, it'd be like, well, they're kind of like New Yorkers. But nonetheless, the way Josephus speaks here sounds just like the way Sadducees would speak to one another. You know nothing at all, nor do you take into account that it is expedient for you. Expeditious. It's expedient for you that one man die for the people, and that the whole nation not perish. Wring in your hands what shall we do? What shall we do if we let Jesus go on as then our whole position and Caiaphas says, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. We're going to take action. One man can die, and that will save the nation. That will save our people. And we're just the guys to make that happen. But he did not say this, John is editorializing here. He did not say this on his own initiative. But being high priest that year, he prophesied. It was an unintentional prophecy. He certainly didn't intend to be prophesying, but nonetheless, his words had deeper meaning than he realized. He prophesied that Jesus, Yeshua, was going to die for the nation. And not for the nation only, but in order that he might gather together into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. So on the one hand, what John is saying, the significance of Caiaphas' statement about it is expedient that one should die, to save the people, to save the nation. What John is editorializing here, he's saying that this one will die, not only to save the nation of Israel, the Jewish people who are in Judea, but Jewish people who are scattered throughout the diaspora. Jesus will die to save every Jewish person, period. Every Jewish person Yeshua dies for. Those living then and those yet to come. That is one point of the significance of Yeshua dying. But a second point of significance goes back to John chapter 10, just one chapter previously. Remember, Jesus said, I have other sheep which are not of this fold. And I must bring them also, and they will hear my voice, and they will become one flock with one shepherd. There's so much in the Hebrew Bible about the unification of the Jewish people, those in the diaspora, those who are in the land coming together. But this goes beyond just the concept of Jewish people coming together. That's as Isaiah records the voice instruction of the Father to the servant. It's too small a job for you to reconcile Jacob, Israel, to me. I'll send you that you may be a light to the nations, and you may bring Jews and Gentiles together into one people, one flock, one nation. So did Jesus die so that Jewish people can be saved? Absolutely. Did Jesus die so that non-Jews can be saved? Absolutely. Did Jesus die so that the Jews that are saved and the Gentiles that are saved can become one new man? Yes, absolutely. All contained in an unintentional prophecy from a rather corrupt high priest. And so from that day on, they, the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council, the Jewish cultural, theological, religious, and political elite, they planned together to kill him. Lest you think John is grinding an axe. This is repeated in Matthew as well. The chief priests, the elders of the people gathered to the place of the high priest, the palace rather, of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and they conspired to arrest Yeshua by stealth and kill him. Mark gives us the same story. The Passover, unleavened bread, 2 days away. The chief priests, the scribes, were seeking how to seize him by stealth and kill him. As D.A. Carson, in his commentary, so aptly says, the decision has now been made. It remains only to carry it out as efficiently as is compatible with political expediency. In short, Jesus is not to be arrested in order to be tried, but he is to be tried because he has already been found guilty. This, John insists, is precipitated by the raising of Lazarus. Therefore, Jesus no longer continued to walk publicly among the Jews, but went away from there. In other words, Jerusalem, the Judeans. He went away from there to the country near the wilderness, into a city called Ephraim. And there he stayed with his disciples. And we come now to a close of the hinge of John. We are now about to embark on the final stage of our journey. The Jewish leadership has finalized their plan. Yeshua will find his way to Jerusalem for his final Passover, and that will encompass the remainder of the book of John. All the pieces are in place. Yeshua performs no more major signs or miracles. From this point on, the die has been cast. The chips will fall where they may. Where do the chips fall for you? What decision have you made regarding Yeshua? What decision have you made regarding the level of authority that he is to have in your life? You reject the whole thing as a fairy tale? You say, well, it's interesting, maybe he's a prophet, maybe he's a miracle worker, but not for me, too esoteric. Or is he indeed your Lord, your Messiah, the sent one who has come to bring light to a darkened world and to bring life to those of us who were lifeless, like Lazarus?